session, we're going to explore how the brain learns to read. We're going to look at phonics versus phonological awareness. A lot of people already teach phonics and they already know how to incorporate that into daily instruction, but maybe phonological awareness is something that you haven't heard of if you're not familiar with, and sometimes it's not even in your curriculum. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about the truth about sight words. What are sight words and how should we be teaching them? And then we're going to go through an effective lesson progression so you can see if your curriculum matches what brain research shows are effective practices in literacy. Before we get started, I want to look at this model of the simple view of reading. The simple view of reading essentially shows us what pieces make up, what pieces students need to be a reader. So often we start back here with reading comprehension. We want our kids to be comprehending what they read, and so we do a lot of instruction around reading comprehension. But that's really not where we want to put our focus of instruction, because that's the end goal. So how do we get a student that is comprehending what they read? Well, the simple view of reading says that word recognition and language comprehension, the product of that is reading comprehension. So when we are focusing instruction, we really need to make sure that we have automatic decoders and we have students who have breadth and depth of vocabulary and are comprehending language at the sentence level, orally, being able to read it and understand the syntax of the language and how it's put together in more formal academic writing as well. So those are the two pieces that make up a good reader. And today we're going to really focus on the word recognition piece, and we're going to look at the phonemic awareness, decoding, and automaticity, that sight recognition, the sight words. Those are the pieces that make up word recognition. We're not going to be hitting language comprehension as much in this session. So let's go ahead and jump into reading in the brain, one of my favorite things. So there's always this debate on the best way to teach reading, right? But I love when science kind of settles the score. In the 1990s, the fMRI machine came in and gave reading researchers this amazing advantage. They could see what the brain does when it's reading. What does it look like? And what's really interesting is they could take test subjects from different ages or stages of reading. So I have a 4-year-old. Maybe taking that 4-year-old and looking at her brain when she's looking at a book and what kind of parts of her brain are activating as she's telling that story to herself. And then I have a 5-year-old that's reading pretty well right now. And what does his brain look like as a beginning reader? The fMRI will show what parts of the brain are being activated. And then what if I were reading on that fMRI machine? You could see what parts of the brain are being activated as an adult advanced reader. So this research really allows us to understand what type of instructions children need, what their brain should look like as a reader, and how are we going to get there? Because often struggling students, their brain is activated much like my 4-year-old's brain when they're reading. So we want to make sure that we're looking at that brain research so that we can align our instructional practices to what that is telling us. So let's go ahead and dive into the reading brain. Let's think back first to when our children learned to talk. Some of you might have children at home right now learning to talk. And I love this picture because this mom is like, yes, I understand everything you're saying. And I think back to my own children. When they say anything that even resembles a word, I'm like, oh, they're geniuses, they're already talking, right? So we give them a lot of encouragement, and we're not discouraged when they produce baby talk. But what about when we're reading with an older child and they're just not getting it, and there's a lot of frustration on both sides, and we don't have that same feeling? Why is that? Why do we have that feeling with a baby? Like, oh, they're kind of talking and we're excited about it. And then when a child is kind of reading, we're not excited about it. There's something different. What is different between learning to talk and learning to read? The difference is that reading does not develop naturally. Our babies will learn to talk, they'll learn to walk. They might be on their own trajectory of development, but they're all going to get those skills because they were wired to talk. They were wired to walk. We don't have to sit down and teach them how to do those things. They just do it. Reading is not that way. We're not excited when our kids struggle with reading because we know that it's not just they're not gonna wake up one day and be readers if they're having a hard time with it. So what does the brain tell us about that? It tells us that reading does not develop naturally, and actually our brains have to be rewired in order to read. So let's go ahead and watch this video. I need to make sure I'm sharing my sound. And listen about the reading brain.
What do we know about the complex process of learning to read? Surprisingly, a lot. Scientific research collected over the past 4 decades reveals what happens in the brain and what must happen in the classroom to enable skillful reading. Most children learn to walk and talk naturally without a lot of support from adults. But reading is different. Reading is not hardwired in the brain, and the neural pathways involved must be developed through successful instructional experiences. Let's look at the reading brain. The parts of the brain that allow us to process sounds and recognize visual images are already in place at birth in the left hemisphere. However, the phonological assembly region is not intact at birth. This is the part of the brain that allows us to connect speech sounds with visual images, such as letters, and enables reading. And it must be built through explicit, systematic phonics instruction and practice with decoding.
So what reading research tells us is that reading does not develop naturally in the brain. We need to wire it, and it gives us all of these processors and things that are active in our brain when we're reading. So I'm going to go ahead and give you different words for those. These processors, this is where your sounds are processed. It's the part of the brain that's going to be telling that you can discriminate individual sounds, you can store sounds, parts of words. We use this part of the brain is active when we're speaking. It's also active when we're reading. The other part of the brain, this letter region that actually process the print, is of course not active when we're speaking. This part is. So these parts of the brain aren't naturally activated together and talking to one another, because when we talk, we mostly use this front part of our brain in this middle section where the meaning is related. So what we need to do when we're teaching reading is get the sounds and letters to talk to one another, those two regions in the brain, and that's our phonics. We know when we're teaching kids decoding, we're teaching them letter sound correspondences, we're trying to get them to connect those. Well, we have to get them to connect that in the brain as well. So if I make a little brain with my fist, and in the back of my brain, that's where my letters are, go ahead and do that on your fist and touch the part of your brain that has the letters, that recognizes the letters, and then the part of your brain that recognizes the sounds that those letters make. And we have to get them to make that connection back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it can take at least 5 exposures to a letter sound correspondence to remember it for the next time. And I love thinking about this as a bicycle riding through the grass. Think of a toddler riding a bicycle, like a trike or something, especially with training wheels through the grass. It's like they just topple over. Not a trike because it's more cemented, but like training wheels, it just like they have a hard time getting through that grass, right? Until a path is made. Same thing with the reading brain. We have to get those two places to talk to one another. And the more times we get those processors, the sounds and the letters processing back and forth, the more well paved that path is and easier it is to ride through that grass. So exactly how does the brain lift a word off a page? So the first thing we need to understand is that there's no single reading center in the brain whose job it is to recognize words. We don't recognize words as wholes. Instead, multiple areas of the brain are activated while you read, which we just saw. So we look at the letters, that back part of our brain, we're looking at the letters, and then we're relating the sound to that. That's our phonics. And then the part in the middle bottom is actually our meaning processor, and that's where we can process the meaning of the word and the context. So one thing that makes English a little bit challenging is it has the most robust vocabulary of any language. We have multiple meaning words, we have shades of words, and so finding that exact vocabulary, we have to have a great vast network of vocabulary and understanding. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the meaning. So if I say to you ship, several things might come to mind. What might come to mind? Shipping a package, a ship like a boat. Good. In this case, it's a rocket ship, So we might need to use the text around to understand that we're talking about a rocket ship, and that's the meaning and context. So those three things come together: the letters, the sounds, and the context or the meaning of the word, and that is how our brain lifts a word off the page. It doesn't remember it as a whole word. It correlates these three things. So let's look back at the brain and find those places on our brain. So you can see here that we have the front part of the brain that I was talking about, the sounds and the letters and the phonics decoding. That's the bicycle route, going back and forth, and then meaning and context. Now I said my 4-year-old, if she's going through brown bear, and she's reading brown bear, these, the purple and the green, those parts of her brain aren't activated. If she's reading brown bear to herself, it's just speech. She has meaning, she has sounds, she's doing this. So when we're wiring them for reading, and now I'm teaching my son to read brown bear, I want him to not rely on this meaning. I want him to be making this hard trip over to the letters and actually decoding those words and making those connections. Early readers need phonics. They don't need to look at a picture to read the word. They need phonics, those letter sound correspondences. Now that we know a little bit about the reading brain, and I made such a big deal about that front part of the brain where they're doing listening for those sounds and processing sounds, we need to say, hey, how do we teach that? How do we activate that part of the brain while they're reading? What do we do for instruction? So most of you are probably familiar with phonics. I feel like that's pretty standard. People know about phonics, they understand phonics, but maybe they haven't heard about phonological and phonemic awareness. I think teachers in public schools are just starting to get a handle on this. It's something that has very little in their curriculum as far as emphasis. And the research in this area is old. I mean, over 20 years, we've known the importance of phonological and phonemic awareness for reading. Yet it's probably the most neglected reading skill. Something that's really interesting is most readers that are adults, maybe struggling readers as adults or upper elementary, middle school, high school, if you actually look at all of their skills and their data, most struggling readers are missing phonological and phonemic awareness skills. So if this is not taught, if it's neglected, then it's not going to just be made up out of nowhere. If we don't fill that gap and we don't teach it, there could likely be a reading problem that's lifelong. So it's very important that we understand what is phonological awareness so that we can teach it and support that area. So what is the difference between phonological awareness and phonics? So phonics is that letter sound correspondence. Phonemes, those are individual sounds. Graphemes are just the letters. And the reason we don't say letters is because, for example, O is a grapheme that makes the oo sound in spoon. So phonemes and graphemes. Phonics is just that. We're matching each sound to each grapheme, to the letter or letters that represent it in a word. That's phonics. What is phonemic awareness then, or phonological awareness? It's the individual's awareness of the sound structure of words. You should be able to do this in a dark room, do it with your eyes closed. You're not looking at letters, you're not looking at words. You are just listening to and manipulating language. So I'm talking about phonological awareness, and then I say phonemic awareness kind of interchangeably. But just for your knowledge, the phonological awareness is all of those sound skills, rhyming, counting how many words are in a sentence, syllables, dividing syllables, and phonemic awareness has to do with phonemes, one single sound. So when we're manipulating at the sound level. So we'll talk about those two things in a moment. Let's go ahead and I want you to try to identify if each one of these is phonological awareness or phonics. So some things to keep in mind, things to look for. Can it be done with your eyes closed? There shouldn't be any letters, any words. Sometimes they use manipulatives, like maybe some hand signals, or I like to use these little magnet tiles to stand for my sounds instead of a letter. But as long as there's not a letter, it can be PA. So let's go ahead and look at this, and I want you to consider each one and decide, is it phonics or phonological awareness?
Make a new word. So if my word is jumping and I change jump to pick, I now have picking. Got it? All right, let's do it. Your word is melted. Change melt to twist.
Twisted.
Great job. Your word is twisted. Change twist to plant.
Planted.
Good job. Your word is planted. Change plant to lift.
Lifted.
Oh, yeah.
So what was that? Phonological awareness. They were manipulating the bigger sounds than words. They were actually manipulating that base word and changing that base word with a new ending to make a new word. Lifted to planted. They were manipulating sounds and words. Let's listen to this.
Good. What sound do you hear? Very good. Phoenix?
Bag.
What sound do you hear?
Ah.
Good. Good job. Where does this go? Okay, so now that we've finished between our ah and our sound, can Cadence, you think of another word that has an ah sound right in the middle of it? These were our words that we had. We had man, ham.
Notice
Is
these
there
are
another word?
pictures.
Oh, hat. Can we use that word? Yeah. Okay, what about a...
So in that video clip, they were doing phonological awareness because they were sorting words by sound. And that was actually an example of phonemic awareness because it had to do with isolating individual sounds. They were sorting it by that ah or sound. And they were using pictures. They weren't looking at the word. They were just looking at the picture and hearing the sounds. Let's watch this one. This one's easy. This is, I say it's easy because it has letters, so it's obviously not phonological awareness. But what's interesting is this little girl is actually matching the letters on top. She's just matching letters. She's putting the Q on top of the Q, the R on top of the R, and so on. So this example is technically not phonics either because she's not dealing with sounds. She's only dealing with letter names. So that's actually just alphabetic principle, just learning her alphabet.
This sentence, I need you to pull how many counters you hear, how many words you hear in the sentence, okay? Not yet. I love cake.
I love cake.
How many words did you hear? Perfect. Good job. All right, Jason, you ready? I'm going to the park. I'm going to the park. How many words did you hear? 5. Good job.
So they are counting words within a sentence, but they do not have the words in front of them. So it is phonological awareness.
All right, Giovanni.
Pizza.
How many syllables?
2. What goes on pizza?
Pepperoni.
Raise your hand, What goes on pizza? What goes on pizza, ma'am? Let's do pepperoni. Ready? Pepperoni. How many?
Counting syllables is an example of phonological awareness. So you see the letters right away. Oh, they must be doing.
Read your word to check. Did you spell bat? Kiss your brains. You got it. Put your letters back where they belong, please. Monkey.
Monkey. Monkey.
Great job. Recess.
Recess. Recess.
Great job. Cable.
Table.
Those students are blending syllables, but they don't see the letters that they're blending together. So it is an example of phonological awareness. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. So this is there's a lot of skills within phonological awareness. We have phonological awareness, the big umbrella, and then we have all these skills under it, including phonemic awareness, and there's skills under that. So it's a lot of things to talk about in one short amount of time. So what I'm going to do is walk through the steps of phonological awareness, the continuum from easiest to hardest. A couple things I want to point out. I have over here the grade level or grade levels this is most appropriate for. If you're starting out and you have like a first or a second grader, you don't need to go back and do all of these things, but I would start at the phoneme level somewhere here and make sure that there's no gaps. I wouldn't go back to rhyming and things like that necessarily. The research is really clear that being up here where these stars are at the phoneme level, at the most challenging, this is where there's the most statistical significance of helping with reading success. So what's really interesting is we can actually look at the phonemic awareness, these skills up here, of a first grade student and predict their reading success later on because it's that important to reading success. So if you're starting with an older student, we want to pinpoint which area up here is most challenging and get there as fast as possible. We don't want to get stuck down here. Down here, these are going to be the bigger sounds, counting the words in a sentence and syllables and rhyming and things that are really important to start tuning that phonological processor, that sound center of our brain in the front of our brain. We want to start tuning into those sounds, but more time spent in preschool doing those kinds of activities, the better off they're going to be when they're in first grade and second grade. But if you're already in first grade and second grade, you don't want to go back and necessarily do these skills. So I'll go ahead and model some of these. We're going to start with compound words. Compound words are great because they can very easily hear the individual words within the word. So it's a great place to start. So there's a couple things that we do within phonological awareness. One of those is blending. So when we're blending, we take two parts and we put them together just like we do when we read. We're putting parts and we blend it together. So we're blending. So we're going to blend compound words. And I'm going to stop share really quickly so that you can see my modeling. So what you want to do is have something to model with. I like using hands for compound words because it's a really concrete and easy way, and it's fun. Phonemic awareness, phonological awareness is supposed to be fun for kids. So I'm going to go ahead and model that for you. I'm going to tell you two words, and I want you to blend them together to make a bigger word. Cupcake, cupcake. Your turn. Say the words with me. Railroad, railroad. Very good. So that was an example of blending. We're taking these two words and we're putting them together to make a word. The next thing is segmenting. So I'm going to tell you a big word, and I want you to tell me the two words you hear in that big word. Football, football. And then just keep doing it, and they'll be able to break those words apart. This is why compound words are so great, because they can hear those words. Let's try the next one. Sunflower, sunflower. You can even do some manipulation where you change part of the word. So let's start with football again. I'm gonna tell you a word, and then we're gonna change part of the word to make a new word. Say football. Now say football, but instead of foot, say base. And then they would say baseball. If they have a hard time with that and they need a manipulative, sometimes I'll do this. I like these math tiles because I already have these for manipulatives for math, so I can use those again. So I'm going to build the word in parts. My word is football. I'm going to take off the foot, base, and they would say baseball. So that'll add a little extra help if they're having a hard time with that. And our goal is to then take away all of the clapping, all the manipulation, and just be able to do it quickly. Say railroad. Now tell me the two words in there, and they'd say railroad, but you don't have to then do all of the manipulation for them. So that is the first example using compound words. Then every single time we're going to get a little bit more challenging. So let's look at the next one. Again, still pre-K and kindergarten. We're going to get into syllables. So syllables, you can count syllables like you saw in that video. You can also manipulate syllables like I just showed you. So let's try some syllable blending. It's the exact same thing we did, but this time we're going to do syllables. So I'm going to tell you two parts to a word, and we're going to blend them together to make a word. Forest, forest. You can even do three. Sometimes you could use your fingers. That helps too, if you want to do 3-syllable words. Listen to me say the parts in a word, and then you're going to blend them together to make a whole word. Evergreen, evergreen. So you can see how you can use your fingers if you want to do longer words. One of my favorites is helicopter, helicopter. So you can see that these are really easy games to play out and about. I play them with my kids in the car. They just think they're games. They don't know that they're doing school. And so I kind of do it sometimes with I spy. Like I spy a helicopter. And using it that way gives them a little context if they have a hard time with it. But usually the blending, they get really fast. It's the segmenting or manipulating that then gets a little bit more challenging. Okay, and then the next one is rhyming. So onset rhyme is essentially the very first part of the word, and then the rhyme is the vowel and everything else. And sometimes we think of those as word families or just regular rhyming. So we know that reading rhyming books, identifying and generating rhymes, it's really good for kids because it tunes into that front part of their brain, that phonological processor. Another thing that you can do is start practicing manipulating using rhymes. So I showed you the manipulation before with the football, baseball example. So let's try that again, but this time we're going to do it with rhyming words. The word is cat. I'm sorry, there's 3. No, we're doing rhyme. We're doing onset as at. We're not doing it by the individual sound yet. At. say cat. Now say cat, but instead of k, say b, bat. Good. Now say bat, but instead of b, say th, that. So you can see how you can use these manipulatives if you need them. If you don't, you can just say it out loud and have them do it. Then we'll get to, finally, the individual phoneme level. This part and above is what I was sharing, that the research is really clear that we want to get to the phoneme level as quickly as possible. The easiest place at the phoneme level that you can even start in kindergarten is that isolation, identification category. So when that teacher was sitting at the table and they were sorting words by middle sound, all the words together that had hat, bat, bag, all of those words were together. They were isolating one sound. So that's how you can tell we're at the phoneme level, that individual sound level. So when we get into that individual sound level, the easiest thing to do is isolate the beginning sound. And you could just take a basket of toys or something like that, and they're sorting them by sound. You can make it a little bit easier, and maybe if you're practicing two different sounds, have them sort all the things that start with b and all the things that start with p, to make it a little bit easier before you just have a bunch of random objects with every different sound. So that's isolating, identifying. You can sort by beginning sound, ending sound, middle sound. And there's some resources that I'll share with you in just a moment that actually have just picture cards that you can print out and use for free. Then the next things are blending, segmenting, and deleting or substituting, manipulating. There's a lot of words, but changing those sounds around. So these three things, blending, segmenting, and manipulating, I could say, you can do all of those within phonemic or phonological awareness, but when you only do it with one sound, we're just going to call it blending, segmenting, and manipulating. So I'm going to model that and notice how it gets a little bit more challenging every time. So let me stop share so you can see. And again, when you're doing this, you can use any kind of manipulative. I like to use a manipulative at first, because if you don't use a manipulative at first, it can get a little bit confusing. So blending, you can use your fingers again. I'm going to say, but this time we're going to do individual sounds, okay? Blend these sounds to make a word. Ready? O, a, lap. Good. Now, notice how I'm going to take the blend and I'm going to pull it apart. I'm going to divide each sound. I don't do a fuse blend like coal together. I'm going to take that apart. What word am I thinking of? O, a, clap. And again, this is a great one for I spy. I spy a car. So you can play that in the car with your kids as I spy and try to do harder and harder words. The ones with more blends are going to be more challenging. And then we can work on segmenting. So once they get blending, you can work on segmenting. And one other thing I want to say about blending, you can see how that would be important for reading, because if they can't hear g and put that together to say frog, think about how much more challenging that would be to see the letters, and then they're processing the letters, trying to figure out which sound is attached, and then blending it back into a word. It's a lot of work. And so this is why this is so powerful before you teach a phonics lesson. Let's say you're going to teach a phonics lesson and you're doing FR blends, and you have them do g, frog, and you have them do a bunch of FR blends. they're already thinking FR, FR, FR. I know that sound says and they're already putting that together. So when they see the text, it's going to be that much easier for them to make that leap into reading. So starting with a phonological awareness warm-up is so important. Okay, so let's go into the next step up, which is segmenting. It's a little bit harder. We're going to do the same thing, except for this time we're telling them the word and they're taking it apart. So the word is frog. Tell me the sounds. G. So it's a little bit more challenging, trying to rip those sounds apart. So I will tell you a word. I want you to break it into sounds. And I like to also use these for that. And then they can point and even move each one. The word is clip. K, O, E, P, clip. The word is chip. Ch, E. In this example, I already had the right number. You can also just put a bunch of them at the bottom. And then when they segment it, they have to move it up. So they are identifying how many sounds are in the word. The last one is manipulating. And we practice this a little bit with the rhyming when we change the first sound in the rhyming word. But this time we're going to pull the whole word apart. So if I say the word bump, b, and change b to j, you get jump. So that's the easiest. And then what we want to do is try to change the ending or change the middle, blend. So the word is clip, o, e, a, clap. So those are some examples of manipulating. And this can actually get really challenging if you ever tried Pig Latin as a kid and you're completely changing the order of the sounds and the words. That is advanced phonemic awareness. So there's research that supports doing this all the way through 5th grade. I'm going to go back and share my screen and show you some really amazing resources that I have for you on the Padlet. So here is the Padlet, and I will share this in the chat. These are all word recognition resources. Remember when we talked about the simple view of reading, that first part of that equation was word recognition. So within word recognition, we have phonological awareness that we just talked about. We have phonics, and we have sight word recognition. And then I also have a column for assessments. So phonological awareness, let's walk through these resources really quickly. So this is the Florida Center for Reading Research, and this does not just have phonological awareness activities, but they are my favorite. Over here, you can check out the grade level, and let's just pick 1st grade. And up here is where you're going to find what type of activity you want to focus on. And then it actually breaks it into that sentence segmentation that we talked about, syllables, onset rhyme. And you can scroll down and see that they actually have segmenting, blending, and you can pick one of these just to show you what it looks like. But it's just a game you can print out. And this is a good example since we used frog. G has 4 sounds. It's just a blending and segmenting game. So the thing that I want to point out really quickly before we move on, if we go back to this, is notice that the grade levels here Vary. I mean, pre-K, 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 first grade, first plus, all here. So what's really great is when you're doing these at home, you can have multiple age kids kind of pitching in and doing these games, and the older ones can kind of help the younger ones, and it's going to be fun for everybody because PA is supposed to be fun. Okay, so let's go back to that Padlet, and we are going to look at the University of Florida Literacy Institute, and they have some really great stuff they put out because of COVID. They have online resources. They have Robbie the Robot, lessons, a sorting game, Conan boxes, and phoneme counting beads. Remember, phoneme is a sound. So these are all online resources that have to do with PA. So it's a great resource for you as well. And then I wanted to just show you, if you want to buy something, if you could just buy one PA resource and that's it, I would recommend this Bridge the Gap. I actually have both the Bridge the Gap, which, whoops, that's the wrong thing. I do have the Bridge the Gap somewhere. Okay, here's the Haggerty. So these are both made by the same company. Here's the Haggerty. And here's the Bridge the Gap. Okay, and both of these resources teach phonemic awareness, phonological awareness. The difference is the Bridge the Gap is supposed to be, the one that I have on here is supposed to be a intervention program, and it actually has an assessment in it, and then it breaks it down into each individual thing. Whereas Haggerty is more like what I did for you earlier. You do a little bit of everything. You do a little bit of rhyming, and then you do a little bit of blending and a little bit of segmenting. And the problem with that approach is that you're kind of like throwing mud at the wall and hoping something sticks because you're practicing everything at once. So if you have a kid who slightly struggles with these skills, they're not going to master anything before you're moving on to the next activity. And so the reason I like Bridge the Gap is it's more explicit and systematic. It's going to go through every single skill and make sure that they get it before you move on to the next thing. So if I could buy one resource because they're similarly priced, I would just get the Bridge the Gap and do it with all kids, to be honest. And you can make it fun by doing some of the other things. I have some videos, these PA videos that I made that show some fun ways to do PA, like put some color for squares down on the carpet and hop as you segment words and do some things like that. And combined with the FCRR, you can get a pretty good interactive PA lesson going on. Something to keep in mind for phonological and phonemic awareness, you're not supposed to drill and kill. It's supposed to be fun, 5 to 10 minutes. That is about it. So go ahead and get on that Padlet, have a short break, and we will come back. All right, welcome back. We're going to jump in and talk about sight words. There's a lot of confusion out there in the education world regarding the terms sight word and high frequency word. They're often used interchangeably. Remember that high frequency words are just those words that we most commonly see in text. The words that you see on this slide are common high frequency words. We sometimes call these sight words, but it's not exactly the same thing. So what is a sight word? Sometimes we think a sight word is a word that you can't sound out, so you just have to memorize. Let's find out. David Kilpatrick says, a sight vocabulary refers to the pool of words we can immediately and effortlessly recognize, regardless of whether they are phonetically regular or irregular. So in other words, sight words are words we instantly recall from memory. So a sight word just means that when you see it, you automatically read it. In fact, your brain can read it so well that you can't suppress it. You have to read it. When you see that's why billboards are so popular on highways. When you see that billboard and you look at it, and you have those words already mapped in your sight vocabulary, you read the billboard. You can't stop reading the billboard. You just have to read it because your brain just processes it so fast. So what we want is for our kids to learn as many sight words as possible. So different kids will have different sight vocabulary. My mom's name is Renata. It's not a very common name. You don't see that very often. And she spells it Renate. So a lot of people say Renate. But for me as a young child, that was a sight word. I didn't have to sound it out. I knew that word because it was in my sight vocabulary. So a sight word is just a word that we instantly recall from memory. But that doesn't mean that we store a picture of that word. We actually store words in our sight vocabulary by looking at those and learning and mapping those letter sound correspondences. So what we want is for readers to decode those automatic, we want new readers to decode for automatic word recognition. We don't want them to rely on pictures to simply identify words. We have to have them do that hard work of decoding because that's how they're going to store those words into their sight vocabulary. So is English really crazy? Read this to yourself. I don't want to read that out loud. It takes some thinking. Okay, so that's probably the worst example, right? Or the, I guess, best example of English being crazy. But is it really crazy? I've told my students that, but I don't tell them that anymore because the facts are that about half of our words in English are phonetically regular. Every single sound spelling, like in the word cat, says and does what it's supposed to do. About half of our words. Another 36% are regular except for one sound, and that's usually a vowel. A lot of vowels don't say the sound that they're supposed to, right? So they have one irregular sound. So we're at 86% of words can really be sounded out with just flexing one vowel. We can figure out what the word is. And only about 4% of words are truly irregular, like the word of. And I don't know why that P is there. Typo. So the word of, the O doesn't say what it's supposed to say. The F doesn't say what it's supposed to say. It's just a truly irregular word. There's only about 4% of words like that. So what we need to remember is to always teach those predictable patterns of English because they're there. We don't want to tell our kids, well, there's just no way we can ever sound this out. We have no idea because English is not that crazy. So going back to the simple view of reading, we need word recognition. Part of word recognition, yes, decoding and phonemic awareness. Those two things work together to create this sight recognition, this automaticity. So when we want automaticity of words and word recognition, we need to be utilizing all these things together. Another reason I wanted to come back to this slide is I really want to dive into this word recognition. Notice we're saying sight recognition. We're saying word recognition. We're not saying word identification. So what is exactly the difference between word identification and word recognition? This is really important because so many of our young readers are encouraged to look at pictures to figure out words in a sentence using those context clues. And that would be a better example of identifying a word. We don't want them to identify the word. We want them to recognize it. So what exactly is the difference between identification and recognition? Again, we're talking about that deep orthography of English. We have so many words that just mean shades of each other. So let's dive into that. If I send my husband for groceries, he'll always wants a list. He always wants a list. So I'll send him a list and then he'll be at the store and I might send him a screenshot or two of something that I know that he's never bought before, or maybe I just like a particular brand, or I want these exact tomatoes, the ones on the vine, but not the big ones on the vine, the little ones. And so I have to send him a picture of exactly what it is that I am looking for. And if he's in a really good mood, I'm just kidding, he's great. He'll look at the picture and try to identify the exact item that I was looking for. And so that's an example of identification. He's able to look at the picture on the phone and then find it in the store and identify the right item. But what about recognition? Recognition is when I give him a very easy grocery shopping list and it has something on there like bananas. He's going to find the bananas. I don't have to tell him, I don't have to send him a picture. I don't need to guide him because he knows what bananas are and he can go get them off the shelf. So that's the difference between identification and recognition. He can recognize those items on sight. And that's what we want our readers to do. We want them to recognize words on sight, not use pictures to look at it, not use the context of the sentence, but actually recognize that as a sight word, have that as part of their sight vocabulary. So we're going to try an experiment that illustrates the power of sight words. So I want you to, I'm going to show you a list of words and they're a variety of color. I'll show you real quick. They're all different colors, all different fonts, and they're color words. You might have done this before. So what I want you to do when you look at that is I want you to actually try to state the color of the word instead of the word itself. So the first one, you'd say blue. See how fast you can read that. I don't know about you, but it's pretty slow going for me. Now try it again and let your sight vocabulary take over. Go ahead and read the actual words. Your eyes quickly scan the page. It doesn't matter what color they are. It doesn't matter the font. It doesn't matter if it's capital or lowercase. It doesn't matter. You can read those words because they are stored in your sight vocabulary and you know them. It's been stored. And what's really interesting is that we actually can identify words that we've already mapped and stored in our sight vocabulary faster than we can identify a picture of that same word. So going back to my husband in the supermarket looking for bananas, if there's a sign overhead that says bananas and he sees that at the exact same time that he sees the actual bananas, his brain is going to process the actual word bananas faster than seeing the bananas in the store. So what we don't want to do is slow our kids down by having them refer to pictures while reading, because that's not the way we store words. The power of automatic word recognition is that we can read these words instantaneously. It doesn't matter. I bet you've never seen yellow written this way in pink letters in this cursive font, but you didn't have a hard time because you don't store these words as visual images. You store them by their letter sound correspondence. So let's revisit really quickly this slide on how our brain learns to read. So our brain learns to read words. It does not process them as whole images. It links those letters to the individual sounds. The back of that brain takes in to meaning. So sorry, we're going to look at the brain. So the front of the brain takes in those sounds of the words, links it to the letters that it sees. The phonics goes back and forth. We're learning each letter sound correspondence. There's not one part in the brain that stores that as a whole. So even though we recognize it instantaneously, almost as if it were a whole word, that's not the way we've mapped it in our brain. So that's really important to know the difference of. And then what we want is, of course, the meaning and context, but that's not looking at a picture. That would be like if I read the sentence, I got on the ship and headed toward the moon, I would know by reading the context of that sentence that I was talking about spaceship. So the meaning is there too. We could take the meaning part out and we could still decode the word, but it makes it more powerful if we add vocabulary. So that's important, especially if you're working with kids whose English is their second language. You want to always, always, always add meaning if you can. So we're going to take a quick moment before we dive into, hey, how do we utilize this information that we know about the brain to effectively teach sight words to be mapped to their sight vocabulary. So we're going to do that in just a moment. I want you to go ahead and take some sticky notes and write these letters on individual sticky notes. Notice that I have my SH on one by itself. You should have 9. And just a quick note while you're doing that, I really like to use my letters. If you want to order something, there's this Classroom magnetic letter box off of Amazon, and it has them all organized for you in alphabet order. I love these. They don't have the digraphs though, so even if I have my letters, if I was first introducing a digraph, I would probably just still put it on a sticky note. You can definitely use sticky notes. A good way to keep these organized for use if you're building words. This is just from the dollar store, just a magnetic board that I found. You could also use, I've seen people use a pizza, round pizza, and you can actually make an alphabet arc, which is really cool for teaching the alphabet and then utilizing that. I think for like a dyslexic kid, this would probably give them a headache, and the alphabet arc would be easier to pull down the letters that they need. So those are some tricks to think about. Okay, let's get started. Our first instructional technique to get that whole brain working together is phoneme graphing mapping. I actually have a whole video on this that you can watch if you want, but I'll go ahead and model it for you now. And this is not just effective sight word instruction, it's just effective phonics instruction. So if within your curriculum, you see a weakness, you can add this in, or if you have a student that really gets stuck on one like series of words and they need to do some of this mapping to help them solidify it, or if you have a dyslexic student, this is a really great technique. I'm going to stop share for just a moment and show you my board. I actually have a phoneme graphing map that you can print off, and it looks a little neater than this. It got a little scuffed up, but this will work too. I often do this with my son when we're working together because I can't find the mat, and it's just easy to write like a 10 frame on a board. So for your purpose, you can just pretend to have the sounds. But what we're going to do is we're going to take what we learned about phonemic awareness, and we're going to match that to the letters. So here's my board, and I'm going to do the word. We're going to pretend it's a digraph SH lesson. So the word is ship. Tap the word ship. Notice how I'm going to actually use my left hand, because if I'm using my left hand, then the directionality of the word is going to be correct for the student as they're watching. If I use my right hand, it's going to look backwards, which will be confusing. So I always use my left hand. Let's tap the word ship. You do it together. Sh, ship. So that's the tap it. The map it is actually where you map each sound. Map. Sh, and then go ahead and build the word ship. Sh. I'm missing my I. Okay, let's try that again. The importance of having your materials ready. Sh. Ship. So what this is doing is correlating each sound to each graphing. So that's why we call it graphing it, is you're going to tap it. You're going to map each sound. Then you're going to put the grapheme or the letters that match each sound underneath it. So that's helping that connection in the brain, connecting those two processors. Let's try another word. The next word is lash. Tap it. Lash. Map it on your board. Lash. And go ahead and graph it. Lash. Now, if I were teaching digraph SH, this would be perfect because I'm showing that in ship, it's at the beginning of the word, and lash, it's at the end of the word. So it can be in both places. So you're getting them used to that orthography. Where is this in the word? And I'm going to try a really tricky one to show you how we break apart blends. Let's do the word shrimp. Tap it. Sh, shrimp. Map it. Sh, shrimp. Can't see them all. Shrimp. Okay, so now we can look at how we can have digraph, blend, So notice on these blends, MP, we don't teach that as a fused sound. SHR, we don't teach that as a fused sound. It's actually 5 sounds. Shrimp. Okay, so that is phoneme graphing mapping. And you can look on the Padlet again for that mapping mat and also a video on how to do that if you want to look at that as well. The next thing is word chains, and you also use this with phonetically regular words. I'm going to show you the slide really quickly. A word chain is where you start with one word and you change one sound at a time to make a new word. Notice how the SH is just one sound. You're changing one sound at a time to make a new word. So let's try a word chain. Go ahead and get your letters ready. We're going to start with the word cat. Build the word cat. I'll stop share so you can see my board. This time we're not using anything for the individual sounds. If you need to have them tap it, if they have a hard time, you can. So let's do the word cat. Now we're going to change cat to cap. Cat to cap. I hear that the end of the word changed. Cap. Now change cap to clap. Clap. You can have them say it slow to help them stretch it out. Clap. Clap. I hear the ol sound after the k. Clap. Good. Now change clap to clip. Clip. You can tell how this is going to make them really pay attention as we co-articulate our speech. All of it jumbles together. It's going to make them really pay attention and discriminate between all those individual sounds. Clip. Now make clip say lip. Good. We take off the C. Lip. Now turn lip into ship. Great job. Read our word. Ship. That is word chains. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, but you're just showing me more phonics for regular words. What about all the rest of the 50% of the words that aren't regular all the way through? So those two activities work really well with that 50% of words that we talked about that are phonetically regular all the way through. For phonetically irregular words, you can use heart word magic. So this is really growing in popularity right now, but it reminds me so much of when I was back teaching dyslexia. If we did the word said, for example, what I would do with my kids is actually teach them that I would write the word said, and then they would use maybe a red or a different color to write the tricky sound. So that would help them remember that the AI was the tricky sound in the word said. And they could kind of visually remember that different color would just stick out to them. It's multi-sensory. It sticks out to them. So when I saw Heart Word Magic, I was like, of course, teach them the phonetic parts of the word. And then the part that's not phonetic, have it stand out. And what Heart Word Magic does is essentially does that with a heart. So let's watch this video about Heart Word Magic. And just make sure that I'm sharing my sound here. And this company, Really Great Reading, who does these videos, they share them with everybody, and it's just an amazing resource, and it's on the Padlet.
Take a look at this familiar word. How long did it take you to read it? You probably read it immediately, effortlessly. Researchers estimate that when a word is familiar to you, you read it in less than 1/20th of a second. Words that we read effortlessly are called sight words.
Sight words can be high-frequency words like these. Sight words can also be low-frequency words like these. If you read these words effortlessly, they are sight words for you.
The collection of words you can read without conscious effort is called your sight word memory. Literate adults have a sight word memory of between 30,000 and 70,000 words.
Everyone's sight word memory is a little different. A first grader's sight word memory often includes words like this. A doctor's sight word memory often includes words like this.
The evidence is very clear that the way to get a word anchored into our sight word memory is through decoding. Once we decode a word successfully several times, it sticks in our brain, where we can recognize and retrieve it effortlessly.
High-frequency words are often the first words we strive to anchor into our students' sight word memories. That's because high-frequency words are words that occur most often in print. At Really Great Reading, we call these words heart words. Heart words are the first words students should learn by heart. These words need to become sight words for our students because they appear in text so frequently, and automatic retrieval of these words plays a big part in reading fluently.
Commonly, educators try to teach high-frequency words through rote memorization. They use flashcards or put them on a word wall, hoping that if students see the words enough times, they will stick.
This isn't much different than what we do in geography when we ask students to look at the shape of a state and then name it. The state with this shape is California. This shape is Florida. Decades of research, however, tell us that rote memorization targets students' visual memory and is not the most effective way to learn to read words. And decades of experience tell us it's a method that's boring for everyone involved.
To store words in our sight word memory, we need automatic letter sound associations, proficient phonemic awareness, and the ability to connect the sounds in a word to its written form. When we focus solely on rote memorization, we leave out the part that we know works best: connecting sounds to letters.
When high-frequency words don't follow common patterns, it can be tricky connecting sounds to letters. However, even in tricky words, there are lots of parts of the word that make sense. It's not like we look at the word said and say glorp. Most irregularly spelled heart words like from, what, and said have only one irregular letter-sound relationship. This is the secret to helping students remember tricky heart words. It's how to make the tricky sticky.
Really Great Reading's developing a free tool that will help children quickly build tricky heart words into their sight word memories. It's called Heart Word Magic.
Heart Word Magic will leverage students' phonemic awareness and phonics knowledge to make learning high-frequency words fun and effective. To see an example using the word said, click here.
Okay, so we actually kind of looked at that word said already, but let's look at it again. And these videos are available on Really Great Reading, and they're student friendly. So that one we just watched was the teacher facing one. There's student facing ones that actually walk them through this. But as an example, when we look at the word said, and we're using this phoneme graphing mapping, it's essentially phoneme graphing mapping meets sight words. So what we're gonna do, I'll just stop share real quick. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to map those sounds and then walk them through that. What is the first sound in said? What usually makes that sound? S. What's the last sound in said? Said. And what usually makes that sound? Good. Said. That middle part, we might think that it should be an said, an e, but it's not. It's a tricky sound. It's a sound we need to learn by heart. I in the word said makes the s sound. And then you can put a heart around it or however you want to do that. But essentially what we're doing is teaching these irregular words using phonetics. Phonetically, this is correct. Phonetically, this is correct. There's only one part. They don't have to memorize this whole word as a whole. They only need to remember this tricky part. It's a really effective way to take phoneme graphing mapping and match it to irregular words. So again, we're gonna, in that Padlet, let me share my screen. There is a number of resources for you. You can see the Heart Word Magic is there, and there's some phonics resources. So definitely take a look at those resources as well. So let's jump into the components of an effective lesson. So I'm not showing you this because I think that you should throw out whatever you're doing and just make up all your own stuff. But what you can do is look at these components of an effective lesson, compare it to what you're already doing, and maybe make a few minor tweaks, adjustments, add something in here and there. Or if you get to a part that's really challenging for your student, then you have some backup things to fill it in. So let's look at the components of an effective lesson. So right here is a video we're not going to watch. It's an entire lesson model that I did using a similar lesson progression. And it's actually with my 5-year-old son. So you can see what the whole lesson looks like from beginning to end and how I do that. So if that's something you're interested in, it's on my YouTube channel. So we go from speech to print. And I love, love, love that term. I wish I would have come up with it myself. But Dr. Louisa Motes says we go from speech to print. And just like we talked about at the beginning of the session, kids learn to speak automatically. They just learn it. They develop it. So let's use what they already know to fill in the gaps of what they don't know yet. We want to start with what they know. So we always want to go from speech to print, starting with that phonemic awareness and then adding in those letter sound correspondences, then moving into a spelling routine using some dictation, and then connecting text. You You might have heard me say earlier that you need at least five exposures to a word to be able to map that to your sight vocabulary. So if you need about 5 exposures, you need to be doing it in decoding and spelling and then reading it within text. So you want to have multiple layers. And also we talked about how meaning is important. So yes, reading it in isolation and decoding routine, that's a great idea. But we also want to read it within connected text and linking it to meaning to help solidify that as in our sight vocabulary. And then throughout an effective lesson, we want to be using that I do, you do, we do. Oops, that's backwards. It should say I do, we do, you do model. So you're doing a lot of modeling and showing them how to do it, especially right away in that decoding routine. Watch me as I sound out this word. Look at my mouth when I make this sound. This is the proper way to articulate it. And they're really paying attention to what you're doing. Now let's try it together. Let's read some words together. Now it's your turn. You do it on your own, and I'm going to watch you and correct you as needed. So not you do, I walk away and you do it by yourself, but I'm going to watch you and monitor. So that's that explicit model guide to guided practice. Release. Oops, we're not reading, I'm watching that. Okay. So we're starting with our phonemic awareness warm-up. And before I said that phonemic awareness should only be about 5 to 10 minutes. So that's what you're doing. 5 to 10 minutes, phonemic awareness warm-up. And the more that you can connect it to what you will be learning that day, the better. So if you were doing that SH lesson, then listen as I say words. And I want you to notice if I use the sh sound at the beginning of the word, or the sh sound at the end of the word, or if it's not in there at all. So they could say beginning, end, and then put an X if it's not in there. That's my son's favorite thing. X, exit out. That's his favorite. So it's just like real quick warm up. Ship, beginning, shop, beginning, and then clip, exit out. So you're just getting them to think about where that is. Or you could do a blending practice. Sh, the word is ship. Or a segmenting activity. We're going to say the word shop. Now tell me the sounds in shop. Sh, ah. So just a quick phonemic awareness warm-up for what you're going to be doing. If you do end up getting some kind of a curriculum like the Bridge the Gap that I recommended, it might not align perfectly, but it is what it is. So I wouldn't shy away from doing that if you don't have time for both. So decoding routine, and you jump into your decoding routine. So you warmed up by doing all that great shh work. And so now you're actually going to show them. This is the digraph. SH, we say it shh. Watch my mouth when I say that sound. Shh, my lips are puckered. It's a continuous sound. I can say it until my mouth runs out of breath. Shh. I really like the keyword ship because it keeps going ship. Often kids get that sound confused with the ch sound. That's very similar. The mouth is the same, but it stops. Ch. So I always call that the chop sound because it stops. Chop. Ch. Ship. So that's just a little clue. But we want to do that with that introduction, the new sound spelling pattern. You are articulating the sound. You're showing them the graphing that goes with it. You're doing all of those pieces. And then you want to read a word list. Ship, shop, all of the words that would match that pattern. But the tricky thing is that all the other letters and patterns within that word, you wouldn't want to do the word shape because you probably haven't taught that long A with a silent E yet. So you want to make sure that all the words are words that are made up of parts that you've already taught. And so we want to read a word list. Research shows that kids really need within a phonics lesson to be reading words that have that sound spelling pattern about 30 times. So do a list of words, but then we're not done. We're going to take those words or words similar to those, and we're going to do some kind of an activity. And this is really the I do it should say we do, you do. I don't know why I have that backwards the whole time. But you can do that gradual release throughout that decoding. And then once we get down here, some kind of activity, the ones that I showed you, the phoneme graphing mapping, the chaining. You could do a sort where they're sorting CH and SH words. Do something with vocabulary. If you have a student that's kind of low in vocabulary or English isn't their first language, vocabulary would be a great way to do some kind of a map to help them take these words and bring some context and meaning to them. And then we get into dictation. So we've read the words, we've manipulated the words through some kind of chaining or something, and now we're getting into dictation. This is the spelling. And what you really want to shoot for is teaching spelling with reading. And this is a really great way to bring spelling as well as handwriting into your reading lesson. So say the word or phrase or the short sentence, say that out loud, have the child repeat you, and then they write it down. So you can do something as easy as ship, or do like a phrase like the ship went. The ship went. It's just a phrase, it's a part of a sentence, or you can do the whole sentence. So those are some ideas depending on the level of the student. So during dictation, again, you have to make sure that all the words have the sound spelling patterns that have already been taught. You want to monitor and reinforce proper handwriting, make sure that they're forming those strokes correctly. It is important. And provide that immediate feedback and error correction. So reteach the phonics as needed, discuss vocabulary as needed, make sure you're just automatically correcting them. If they're not sure how to spell something, just reteach it. Remember that SH makes the sh sound. Can you fix that? And go ahead and just tell them what it is and provide immediate feedback. And then finally, we get into the decodable text. This is so important. You want them reading words within text that they just practiced with to kind of solidify everything. And when they're really young, you could probably write your own decodable text, and there are some resources on the Padlet. The Flyleaf Publishing has some decodable text that's really good too. So we will take one more quick look at the Padlet. And that is it for today. So go ahead and put in the chat if you have any more word magic's going on. And I will just show you in the phonics part, there is some more stuff from University of Florida Literacy Institute. That explicit phonics lesson that I showed you, as well as tools for reading, is amazing. It has so many good resources. You just go to the resources tab. And they used to have all the West Virginia phonics lessons, but they're not there anymore. It says that they're currently working to bring it back. So I'm going to keep my eye open. But I did find another place that those are linked. And they're down here. So you can open those and actually pinpoint specific skills if they're supposed to be interventions. So if your child's missing one specific skill, you can go in there and find that and teach them based on that. That lesson progression is in here for you as well. And this is the last thing I want to show you, the free diagnostic assessments. So these assessments, if you are listening to this and you're saying, I don't even know where to start, like, okay, I have to do some phonemic awareness, I need to go back and teach them sound spelling patterns, but I don't know what they need, I don't know where to start. This is what you need to do. You need to come to the Really Great Reading site. And there's the PA survey, letter knowledge survey. They have all these free assessments. The advanced decoding survey, this is going to be if you have an older child, first, second grade or up, that is still missing decoding skills. We want to get them caught up, and we're going to know what they need by doing a quick assessment. So if that's something that you need help with, you can definitely reach out. That's what I do. And here is my contact information. Thank you so much for coming.